We're back. We're back together, Kathleen.
Hi, Karen.
Now, actually, what people don't know is, like, they're going to see this, like, weeks apart, but we're doing a marathon of interviews here, so we're just talking, like, all day. This is our job.
You're going to be so sick of me.
You know, it's funny. There was a while where I was doing a talk show, and, you know, my friends kind of lost track of, you know, like, what I was doing, and they'd sit there and go, well, what is it that you're doing now? And I was like, a talk show. Basically, what we're doing right now over dinner, that's like my job. Yeah. And so, you know, I will charge you like $45 an hour at the end of this meal.
Basically get paid to visit is what they think. But we all both know there's a lot more goes into it than that.
There's a lot more that goes into that, indeed. Yeah. And speaking of a lot more that goes into it, the piece that's coming up is a piece called For the Love of Matty. And the last time we were talking a bit about visual storytelling and how necessary it is and how complicated it is. And I've got to say, in between the earlier piece that we had on IAP and this piece, you picked up television. Like, it is really just rich with pictures.
It is. And, I mean, I can't take even half of that credit. I had a rockin' editor, downtown Jordan Brown. And I had a veteran shooter, Luke Smith, and we had a family that allowed us to embed with them, which made the huge difference. We moved into a house next door to their house because I knew when I was given the story from my boss, Paul Barnsley, who said, you know, this is pretty urgent. These people are going to lose their home. And I was going to have you do it later in the season, but you've got to drop what you're doing and get on this one. And so I quickly read the material, did a few phone interviews, and realized, yeah, you know, things were getting desperate on their end. But to tell a story like this, I had to see what a day in the life was like.
Yeah, and that is the story. It's like an unfolding of a day. Maybe give us a little bit of background. Set us up on what the story is about, and we'll talk a little bit more about why those images are so important.
Okay, for sure. So this is a family, a couple, a non-Indigenous couple live outside Regina, Saskatchewan, and they have an Indigenous foster son named Matthew Brandon. They've had him, they welcomed him into their home, I think he was 6. And he had been in care before that. He has he's severely handicapped. He has a lot of physical disabilities. He has like cerebral palsy, maybe some FASD, and some things that can't even really be very easily diagnosed.
They thought maybe he was autistic as well.
Right, because he's nonverbal.
Right.
So he is, now he's a man, an adult male in his early 20s.
And a big guy. He's a big guy.
He's a big guy, he's 6 foot something. But he wears a diaper. And he has the mental capacity of a toddler. He never goes anywhere. You'll see it in the piece. He never goes anywhere without a portable DVD player, and it's always playing cartoons or some kind of sound. But he can't just have pictures. He has to have the sound with it. I mean, he watches things intently and repetitively, and not just animation. You know, he'll watch. There'll be a certain TV show or something that he'll like, but he has to have that with him for, you know, his stimulation and I think as well it's just companionship, you know.
Yeah, like a comfort. Yeah.
So Chris and Shannon, the foster parents, they both grew up in families that had foster children, so they are comfortable with welcoming people into their home and living with them and people that have disabilities, and so they couldn't have children of their own. Shannon, they talk about this in the piece, had 3 miscarriages. And they're very honest that it might have been the stress from this Matty situation, because what was happening was Matty was living with them and they were doing a beautiful job. They take a very different approach to parenting. And one of the people I interviewed said he thinks it's because they're both artists. They're both visual artists. And they just so outside the box, their parenting and the way they work with him. In fact, they had, as part of their struggle, ongoing battle with the Saskatchewan government, family services department. They had somebody come in and do an assessment. And this woman had a long career of this work, and she was blown away, she wrote in the assessment, at their parenting skills and the way they handle this severely handicapped individual. And so what happened was he was living with them, and they had a life, and they were a family, and they were doing great, and then he aged out. And what happens, we all know when you age out, you're on the street. Mm-hmm. And it's either a fast track to exploitation, homelessness, you name it, all kinds of horrible things.
He would basically have to be institutionalized, and because he cannot take care of himself. He cannot.
And what the Saskatchewan government was saying was, well, then he has to go into a group home. And they are like, absolutely not. Even a group home is not specialized enough to care for an individual like this. He may look like an adult, but he can't even talk. He can't tell you what's wrong with him. You know, he makes guttural sounds, and when routine is so incredibly important to him that if he's thrown off his routine even a little bit, they use the words, he would become a feral individual. Like, routine is so important. And they've got it down. So what happened was a battle when he aged out, and the funding stopped. And then they had to go through their savings, and then they were about to lose their home because they weren't making their mortgage payments, because they were using every penny to continue their care for him. And it costs money. And they can't, it's not like you can put him down in his room and then go upstairs and watch a movie and make dinner. I mean, he needs constant supervision. And you can't, one of them can go out, but the other one has to stay home. So if they want respite care, they have to pay for it because they're no longer under the government umbrella. So it was an incredible story in terms of the battle that ensued with the province, and so many assessments and the red tape, and just coming up, you know, butting heads with this bureaucracy about how the bureaucracy is like, well, this is what we do in black and white. Yes, but our individual doesn't fit into that black and white. Can you come? Can you get to know your client? Can you see what he needs? Nope. This is what we do. He's out on the street or he's in a group home. And the other fear about a group home was they would likely medicate him. Yeah. And they don't use any drugs with him. They use maybe some natural remedies when he's not feeling well. He eats very good diet. I mean, he's so well cared for. And they are like, this is the hill we're going to die on. We cannot lose him. He's our son in every intent of the word. And so I asked them, well, what about adopting him then? And they said, well, sure, that might be like a family solution. But, you know, he's a ward of the province. And so he is the government's responsibility.
And they'll pay for him to be in this, like, group home, but they won't pay to keep him in a place where he's better off.
Where he's loved, has a family. And they said he's a poster child for how care could be. Yeah. And they themselves know there are many families struggling with this, Indigenous, non-Indigenous, struggling with caring for people, high needs individuals without any government money, who don't fit, a bureaucratic definition of who should get funding for what purpose. This is where the bureaucracy falls down. This is where government has to catch up. And also, at the time, Brad Wall was the premier, and he said, listen, I used speeches from Brad Wall in my story where he said, listen, disabled people are important people in Saskatchewan, and my government's going to this and that. And then, Brad Wall, what did you do? They were being asked, well, how much money do you need to look after him? It was less than putting him in a group home. And yet the government balked at that. Said, why would we pay you to look after him? We just stick him in a home where we're going to pay people to work shifts around the clock, maybe not even learn his first name properly. Just let the system take care of him. So that's what the story was about, but you have to show that.
And that's where we get into the picture. So, I mean, when you're going out to do a story like this, I thought it'd be interesting if we just kind of broke it down for people. This is how reporters think. This is what we do. So the first thing you would do is you would get on the phone and you would find out all the information, right?
Right. Now we had a report, and it was called The Secret Shame. And so right away, that sounds pretty juicy, right?
Yeah.
And it was written by a fellow who was a former cop in Saskatoon. He was also a former investigator for the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission. And he was put inside the Ministry of Family Services by the government to kind of do an assessment of the bureaucracy, and he wrote this report. And then he came to know Shannon and Chris and learned their situation with Matty, and he became an advocate for them. He completely he saw what they were doing and he completely supported it, and he has lent his name and a lot of his energy to helping them. So he's the one who contacted Investigates and said, I'm going to send you this report, and that's going to give you some context, but I'm going to be right up front and tell you I'm now an advocate for the family, and they were told that they could form a board, an organization, and then maybe the government would give the organization money, and then the organization would hire Chris and Shannon to be the employees, and then they would look after Matthew. It was put out there as a sort of a compromise.
Like they almost become they almost organize themselves like, okay, we're a group home now.
And so, yeah, just don't say mom or dad. Yeah, so he said this is absurd. I really feel that your viewers need to know this. Like Investigates needs to look at this. Yeah. And Matty is an Indigenous, he's Indigenous, and he was taken into care. We don't know all the reasons why. Like his file is sealed, and so because of decisions that were made, he's now in this situation where the government wants to wash its hands of him, as it does of so many, wards, as they're called, very uncharitable word, and just leave them to fend for themselves or let the system take care of them. So, to do this story, I had to talk to this advocate, and then I started making calls to the bureaucracy, and we all know how much fun that is, because they don't want to talk to us. And they have put up all kinds of walls to prevent you from getting to the people who really make the decisions. And it was a real runaround. I remember asking for a photo of the Minister of Family Services, and I was denied.
Wow.
And I'm like,
seriously?
okay, I can go to Google and get it. But I mean, if you might have a nice headshot of her to put in the story. Like it was just like, you didn't want to talk about it.
But that's also when you know you've got a good story. It makes everything the parents are saying and the advocate are saying about how they're not getting help more credible. Because if somebody is honestly trying to help them, they're going to talk to a reporter and say, no, these are all the great things that we're doing, and here's what we're trying to do, and they shut you out,
Very true, yeah. I mean, my spidey sense was going, and I had a small window because they were really at risk of losing their home. Their finances were in disarray, and so that financial stress on top of losing Matty, and they had given it a shot. Listen, Chris and Shannon did everything they could do. They're like, okay, they actually drove Matty to the group home. They let him go into a group home for a weekend and give it a try. And he came out of that group home and he had a hand mark. You'll see it in the story, a mark of a hand on the side of his face, like a bruise. And somebody hit him. And we don't know if it was a staff member or another, resident. And that was after the very first time in there. And so they picked him up, and the beautiful thing about the family is they document everything. They have video cameras, they have GoPros, they have a Facebook page. They're very transparent about what they do. Not only because they feel a responsibility that they care for a vulnerable individual and they don't have anybody looking over their shoulder. They don't have anything to hide. They live their life like that, but also to help educate society in general about what they're doing, what's working with Matty, showing Matty's his strengths, his weaknesses, how he's growing, things he likes, his dislikes, And also just, it was a way to show their battle. Like, they were very public about, hey, here's what's happening now. You know, we're not getting any funding. We can't do this with Matty. We can't do that. This was before you could, you know, raise money on the internet kind of thing, which now you can do, and I don't know if anybody will for them. But, you know, they're very transparent. And so because of that, when they picked up Matty, they were videotaping. So you hear Shannon's running the camera, and you hear Chris saying, "Hi, Matt, what happened to your face?" And then the camera goes to his face. Shannon zooms right in, and then we froze that. And Matty turns and we froze it, and you could see the hand mark on the side of his face. And he can't tell you because he's nonverbal. And so they asked, and they were told he walked into a wall.
A wall shaped like a hand. So I mean, you get there on the scene, and like some of those opening shots, it is a piece where you kind of go through a day in the life, and it was so important, I think, to see that. Like, people, you know, like in broadcast, they sometimes don't understand why we get in there intimate with the camera, but you cannot fake the kind of care and love that you're seeing in there when he's waking up in the morning and they're putting on his socks and you know, getting him dressed, and you know, or some of the family footage that they had where they're wheeling him on the bicycle and he's laughing, and you know, there's that moment where the dad pulls out a talking stick and says, you know, we were thinking maybe he was just waiting for this, and maybe he'd say his first words to us. You know, like, those are things that really show you, you know, show you, don't tell you. Like, if you say, this couple takes great care of this kid, well, he's not old now, but, you know, but when you see it, when you see those moments, you really understand that there is love there. Oh,
and, you know, I did separate interviews with Chris when Shannon was out with Matty, and then vice versa, and these were, you know, these were over an hour. I mean, my poor camera operator was like wilting behind me, but I mean, they just talked about everything and were so honest about and disclosing things and personal things. Like, you know, we had 3 miscarriages. Was it because of the stress of raising Matty? Was it because of the stress of the battle with the bureaucracy? We don't know. But now he's our son in every, you know, way, and we could never just give our son up. And, you know, I had to make sure the camera operator would understand that this is not, we're not somewhere where it's just regular folk and they can be instructed to, please sit here, and now we're going to chat on camera, and then the camera operator's going to walk around there and he's going to get that shot. And routine, we disrupted Matty's routine.
Right. And
that had a huge impact. It took, you know, they right away said yes because they knew the value of it, but it came at a cost. It came at a cost of, it took several weeks to return to normal after we left. And we spent almost 48 hours trying to capture a 24-hour period in their life. And, you know, because they get up at the crack of dawn, and we had, as soon as they were up, they texted us. We were over there, and Shannon makes breakfast. Chris goes down. He gets them out of bed. He gets them dressed. He's talking to him, and the whole time we've got a big camera on him, and with the big light. And Matty is sort of sitting there, and we couldn't have him looking at the camera, right? And so Chris is just doing his normal thing, but Matty makes sounds, and you know, sometimes the sounds would, and he gestures, and he has, you know, he moves his arms and things, and a lot of that we had to cut some of that where he just made. He got very agitated. You could tell he was agitated, whereas normally, like, maybe he would just be calmly going like that. He would be like that, you know. And so we learned a bit of hand signals from them so that if things were looking a little bit too intense, you know, we would back off. And I stayed well out of the shot. It was just going to be the camera operator, Luke, and them. And Luke did his thing. Luke is very quiet, I find, as an individual, and he non-threatening, no ego, and I think that was the perfect personality because, you know, Matty was drawn, of course, to the camera and the light, but not the person behind it, and so Luke was very, agile and moving around, and we got what we needed. And then at night, one of my favorite shots is at the end where they're sitting on the couch by the Christmas tree and they're reading a book. And Luke shot that from outside their house through the window.
Wow. Yeah.
And I just love that shot. And he's like, you know what, I can do it and I don't have to go in the house and bother them. But I want to get a nice night shot, you know? And so cameraman, smart, but having to be there and see as well. And seeing the limitations and adapting to them, right?
Yeah.
And I think he just did a wonderful job, you know. We do a lot of aging out and kids in care stories, but that one was really challenging with the individual and pulled it off.
And you know, what's happened to the family?
Well, they have a new battle, to be honest. I did one story on it for the web, aptnnews.ca. He goes to a day program at an organization called Ranch Airlo in Regina, where they drive him. And he has a couple of carers there that were looking after him on weekends. Mm-hmm. And they were doing it as a side job. And Chris and Shannon were paying them. And because it was settled, sorry, I should just jump back and say this became settled with the province, and they were given funding to keep Matty at home. And the money goes to like a board, and it's that organization. Mm-hmm. So the money flows through the board, and then the board pays Shannon and Chris's salary, and then that's how they raise Matty. And so that stayed intact. What happened was after the story ran, I think the story helped, so it became resolved. They got back pay, like a lump sum, and then they were able to pay off, get caught up on their home arrears, and their bills. And these people don't live high on the hog or anything, you know. They live a pretty frugal life, but they got caught up. They managed to keep their home, and you know, they have one vehicle which they need to drive Matty in and out of the city to his program. So then what happened was Ranch Airlo, and things were ticking along just fine. Then Ranch Airlo said, you know what, we're noticing that some of our staff are kind of tired on Mondays after not having a break on the weekends, and we want them to have self-care. So that's still up in the air about how much an employer can tell you what you can and cannot do in your private life. But basically put a stop to these individuals being the carer for Matthew on the weekends if they worked at this location, at this office. So then Shannon and Chris were doing 7 days a week by themselves and became very burned out, and were messaging me almost daily, like, you know, can you do another story? So I did a story for the website. It didn't have a huge impact at that time. But eventually, and I think that lasted about 2 months, and Chris and Shannon were just exhausted. And one of the individuals who worked at Ranch Airlo quit his job, and because he said, I miss Matty and I want to work with him on weekends. So I think he now is his main carer on weekends, and I'm not sure how else he's making up his income during the week, but he is much needed respite that Chris and Shannon need. And it makes you think too, like, yeah, that's where a group home would be great, because you've got people staffed there, so you see the value of a place with staffing. Mm-hmm. But you see too that you need that personal connection. Like Matty needs somebody that he trusts. Like, as soon as someone new comes into his world, it upends it. Right. So a group home wouldn't have worked, you know. So their struggle continues, right? And Matty will need lifelong care. So they are very good advocates for him. You know, as they age, though, I don't know what's going to happen, and who else would care for Matty. But it's a story that keeps going, and you know, we are in touch still. Yeah. You know, when you bond like that over a story with a lot of people, you still stay in touch with after the fact. Yeah.
Well, for sure, a really important story. I'm really glad that you did it, and you know, one of those stories that does help out.
Yeah, do a little good in the world that seems more and more troubled every day.
Well, thanks for talking to me today.
Okay, you're welcome.